I'm so thankful to be on this video call today with somebody that I have known and loved for many years, and he's had a great impact on my life, on my wife, on myself, and
Mm,
we've had the privilege of being able to watch him grow and blossom, and now serve in a capacity out in Ohio,
mhm.
Cleveland, Ohio area, and his name is Jelani Pinnock, Jelani Aswad Pinnock, to be more official. I hope I got that right.
Yeah.
And Jelani, I love you, and thank you for being with me today on this video call for this time of conversation. Maybe you could just share with those who maybe don't know you very well
Mm,
a little bit of just who you are and your story, and maybe even your connection to Faith Assembly, how that all
yeah.
came about.
Yeah, so I'm from the Spring Valley area and went to high school there, middle school, elementary school, and attended Faith Assembly of God in Chestnut Ridge. I probably still know the address, but attended Faith Assembly of God all throughout really middle school and high school. And at that time, PJ was the youth pastor, and his wife Kivian, as much of you may know, she was the she was a worship leader and really taught me everything I knew about worship, about on a technical level harmony and singing, and that's kind of where I first got into ministering as far as like my talents go and discovering the things that God had put inside of me. And yeah, served there, came to Christ there when I was about probably 14 or so,
Mm.
and went all through my high school years to youth group there. And I think that's pretty much it as far as the connection. Really, I had a longer journey of, you know, really when transformation began in my life. So let's say the seed was planted at that time, and um, Kivian, and I always like to say that Kivian and John play like a bit of a pillar for me, pillar of fire, I'd say. Like when I would look back and think of, is it time for me to make that choice to go all in for Christ? I'd be able to look back and say, there were two witnesses for sure that were solid and showed me that it's possible and showed me that you could do what you've been called to do and be who you are and also follow Jesus all at the same time. So probably I'd say 10 years after leaving youth group, I kind of, maybe not 10 years, a little bit less than that, I kind of started to just say, hey, I've tried a lot and I've tried everything else and it hasn't worked and I'm ready to go all in for Jesus. And right around 24, I would say I started to really take the call that I knew I had on my life serious and got married, went back to school, finished my bachelor's in pastoral ministry at Nyack College, which is also a school that PJ went to,
Yes, sir.
and in our area. Go Nyack, man. And really that just began the journey of me learning what it means to live a surrendered life as a minister and really just, follow Christ with my whole heart and actually lead a family to do the same as well. So yeah.
Mm. Tell us a little bit about your family right now and where you are.
Yeah, my family. So me and Naija is my wife. We'll be married 9 years this year,
Woohoo!
which is crazy. 9 years this year. We have three children, 8 years old, 4 years old, and one. Um, all right, my daughter will turn 8 in July, my oldest. And we live in Cleveland, Ohio area. We live in a town called Lakewood, which is, if you're from the Rockland County area, is very similar to Nyack. It's a river town. It's actually on Lake Erie. Houses real close together. Not everybody has a yard and or a big yard, and some people don't even have driveways. Um, and so we kind of like that environment, and it's not too far from our church, but it definitely feels a little bit more like home. But Cleveland's been our home for 4 years. January with 5 years, which is insane.
Tell me a little bit about what you're doing right now at the church.
Yeah, so when I came to Grace Church, which is we're part of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, very similar to the Assemblies of God. There's a lot of history there. I won't go into
Sure.
that, but um, I'm licensed with the Christian and Missionary Alliance, which is the same denomination that kind of was founded at Nyack College. The crazy thing is, you don't know this, but last week I took my ordination written exam. Many hours, 120 questions, pure theology. I did I did decent on it, and now we have the follow up, which is always a verbal next week. So I'll be officially a reverend if everything goes well. This coming Tuesday, after this coming
Awesome.
Tuesday.
Awesome.
So yeah, I've been serving here as a worship pastor, um, and part of my role for at least almost 4 years was doing exactly what PJ and Kivian, which is insane, did in my life, and building into young adult worship leaders, and building into youth worshipers, and just teaching them the theology of worship and what it means to be a pastoral worship leader, and trying to pass on what I've learned, and how I've grown in that area. And more recently, at the end of the year, I still continue to lead worship and pastor and shepherd our adults, in our ministry. But then the other half of my job, was handed over to somebody from within our ministry who was raised up. She now, very capable, gifted young woman, um, has an education background and loves children, and is doing what I was doing. And then I'm also now pastor of communications as well. So between worship and communications, and that means media, graphic design,
Sure.
social media, all the things that project God's word in various ways. So that's my heart. And I never thought I'd be doing that in a church, and never thought that God would equip me to do something like that. But here we are.
Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will grant you the desires of your heart.
It's true.
Amen. Amen. Let's dive in a little bit deeper,
Yeah.
as we talk about what's happening on our national scene right now.
Hmm.
How has this impacted you personally?
Hmm. I was just talking with the head of our worship ministry a little bit earlier, and thank God that this week is a better week than last week,
Mm,
because this week has been a week of processing, discovering new allies in the fight against injustice, um, recognizing that because we're in a global pandemic, and it's been global, in its effect that George Floyd's death has had on really the world. Um, it's been healthier for me, and it's been a better processing season this week. But last week was horrific, man. And I mean, we cried a lot of tears. We were infuriated, hopeless, feeling like here we go again, kind of thing. Um, and also feeling very much alone, not for too long, because certainly the church gathered around us, and those who we believe, again, I use the word allies because that's something that I'm digging deeper into.
mm,
What does it mean to be an ally versus one who's just kind of supports you, but really takes that transition into a deeper walk with grieving with someone? And it was hard, emotionally draining, conversations with people, um, a lot of rants, a lot of venting, and
yeah.
then also doing something we had never done before, which was going out to the actual protests in Cleveland and experiencing our first protest against injustice. So it was a huge week for us and very transformational.
Tell me a little bit about that. What
Right.
what what motivated you? Did you and your wife Nyasia, did you guys do this together?
We did it together. We took our kids as well, and
Okay.
and
What moved you to get out there?
right. Uh, you know what? I have also been on a journey of reconciliation, and I by no means think that I can speak for all black people, black and brown people in this nation. I by no means think that I'm an expert in this. And but I said, like, if I'm not willing to go where I'm demanding of people to go, then
Mm,
why even engage? Because really, when we talk about Philippians 2, he said he saw it not robbery to consider himself equal with God, but
mm,
instead he came down. And so, just the very act of Jesus coming down, honestly, even if he did nothing else, he would have made a statement that I'm willing to be amongst the suffering, and I'm willing to be even amongst the people I don't agree with, because we weren't living in line with Christ. So, I need to go down and be around people who are the suffering people, be first for myself, experience empathy and show empathy. And I think that's what being at the protest meant for us. And it also was knowing that I'm raising black and brown girls who are in predominantly white areas, helping them to see that there's partnerships, there's again allies, and there's another narrative about life, that even they'll live a better life than I've ever lived, even though my mom did a wonderful job raising us. But to know, like, there's more out there, and there's more people suffering than you know. So that's kind of what the motivation was. It was kind of like an enough is enough for me, and my family.
Let's keep it real in
Mm-hmm.
this conversation. What would you say to those folks who all they're seeing in their images are all the rioting,
Yeah.
and all that side of things? They're saying, "Oh, that's what this is all about." What would you say to those folks who that's what they're walking away from their television set or their computer screen from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's hard if we live our reality through 16 by 9 widescreen. It's hard if
Mm,
we live our reality through a TV screen. Um, One of the biggest problems with the church right now is that we're not gathering, and we feel as though it's hard to not gather and to have to live through a screen. Well, we should apply that to every area of our life, to be amongst the people and to be fully enthralled and engaged with the reality rather than the perception. I said in another talk, we live in a world of filters, perceptions, narratives. And so, as people who are commanded to, I don't know if it's John 15, but God is a spirit, and those who worship him in spirit and in truth,
sure, John
right?
4. Yeah,
John
yeah,
4.
yeah.
And so, if I'm not able to experience the truth for myself, just on a humanity level, if I'm not physically there and able to have these conversations with people who are going through things that are in my circle of influence and reaching out and putting myself in a vulnerable position to learn, I probably shouldn't comment. I probably should have nothing to say, because we want to be able to speak from a place of knowledge. And again, since Christ came down and did what he did in sacrifice for all of humanity, he can speak to all of humanity. So we as believers, and I speak mainly to believers because I do believe 100% that 1 Corinthians 15, right? I don't judge outside of the body, I judge within. And so I have the mandate, I believe, and the I'm commanded to call my brothers and sisters to awaken, like to be awoke, like wake up, like you have a part in this. I'm not telling you what to do or how to do it. I'm just saying come and see, right? When that first disciple got called, and one of the first disciples, and he said, Jesus, where do you live? He said, come and see. And that began the journey. So we have to really be careful about commenting on storylines, narratives, and perceptions that are handed to us by entities that are capitalistic driven. They want money. They want people to watch. So they
Sure.
use drama and use everything that we like to see in order to get us to pay attention when there's a different narrative out there.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. Tell me if any of this is something that you experienced as a kid. I remember you years ago sharing with me something that left a pretty big dent in your life, even as a child in school. It was a gift you were given, and maybe by your dad at that time. And
Oh man.
next thing you know, is one thing led to another. And if you see any correlation at all in all of this.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. That was huge. So basically I was in fifth grade. I was in fifth grade, actually fourth grade, and I had a teacher I loved at that time who really was, kind to us. And it was just, we had an assembly. This is when I was living in the Bronx. They had a morning assembly every morning. Every student gathered. They heard probably a word from the principal or something like that, and then you got dismissed off to your classrooms where you spent the rest of your day. My father had given me a little small Swiss Army knife, and really something real tiny, probably 3 inches, maybe less, like two and a half, something like that, real small.
I loved my
Probably,
Swiss Army knives as
you know what
kids.
I mean?
I
It was
love
just
those
one of
little
those
things.
things.
Yeah.
Like my father at the time, he's an electrician, but he was always having tools and things like that. And it's kind of like, oh, it's your first tool. So I showed a kid right next to me that I was sitting, like, hey, look at this. Um, I honestly thought nothing of it. I was like, it's cool. Like, hey, look at this toy that I have, basically. And a girl in front of me literally turned around and said, "Oh my God, he has a knife." It was unbelievable. First of all, I froze. The place went in pandemonium. I remember being dragged off to the principal's office of where I was never released from. They detained me basically for the whole entire day, and they began to question me without my parents' knowledge, without anyone's knowledge.
Mm.
And it was kind of real simple and straightforward to me. My dad gave me a pocket knife. I was showing it to my friend. That's the end of the day. That is where I literally, my day ended right there. Like I didn't go to class that day or at all. I was in, and so I got questioned by probably who were, I guess, a couple guidance counselors, and I couldn't tell you what they were, but I just remember around three statements they asked me to sign in fourth grade.
Wow. Wow.
All were, I remember them being written perfect penmanship by an adult. It was written by an adult. I mean, PJ, people said that I tried to cut their throat. I tried to stab them. You
Mm.
name it. I got suspended, and I remember having to go to the Board of Education and telling them what I wanted to be when I grew up, and because what was on the line was, do I attend a regular school any longer?
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And so me, I currently at the moment I lived in a home with two parents. My mom was extremely hardworking. My father worked and had a side business and did different things. And I remember my father coming, and this is really the beginning of what I saw, what it meant to be truly an ally and an advocate.
Mm.
He lost it in the principal's office. Let go of my son. What are you doing here? This is trash. This is not true. And I raised my son to be this and that. And again, I'm in fourth grade, and I was a great student.
Right.
I continued to be a great student through elementary school, but they really tried to end me. And so I just felt like I saw a concerted effort to get someone who they perceived as a threat based on not truth, but on
Mm.
perception,
Mm.
and remove me from, honestly, society, put me on the fringes of society. And that's what we have today with the industrial jail complex, and we have with profiling people and things like that. So that's the advanced level of it. But I think those were the seeds where something clicked in me that you could be completely innocent, and if a person in their mind and their filters and their narratives all culminates in them having more authority over you in a moment, you could either end up dead in jail or in a really bad position and have no power to get yourself out of it. Thank God I had a father at that time. Thank
Mm.
God I have my father in heaven now. Right? So that, I didn't expect you to bring that up, but that was like, I didn't even think about that connection point.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. What would you say to young men and women right now who are feeling very, very disillusioned by everything that's going on?
I would first say it's okay to not be okay. James 4 talks about, weep, wail, and moan. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and at the proper time, He will exalt you. There's this idea that we have to come before the Lord naked. I go back to the scripture about, like you said, John 4. Those who worship Him worship in spirit and in truth. We've heard this kind of terminology used loosely. Live your truth. It's right to a certain extent. A lot of us struggle with not being okay and wanting to put on a face for society, especially in church. If we can't lament and be broken before our brothers and sisters in Christ, tell me, who can we lament before? So I think as an individual, you have to be able to demand a space to lament and weep and wail. And once leaders in church give those spaces, I think we'll lose a lot less young leaders, especially leaders of color, in a particularly multicultural setting like yours, which I think reflects God's heart, sometimes more than a monocultural setting might reflect God's heart. So we don't want to lose our young, influential, on the fringe, even skeptic leaders because they don't even have a place to mourn and grieve. We want to make sure that that place is available, and that a person who is in grief and in a state of lamentation actually takes the time to do that in a safe space, right? So I would say that's the first step. Being around safe people who allow you to lament and grieve safely, because that's where we begin to see each other's pain and move on to empathy.
If I could say for a moment, you speak to this for a moment for me. I'm a young black male or a young black female in a church where I still don't feel that the people around me get it.
Yeah.
I still don't feel that the people around me get it.
Yeah.
Should I just bail on the whole thing? Like maybe I should find some place, that just understands me better. Speak to that for a moment for me.
Right. So if I'm talking to young believers, because I want to be able to speak to calling and to, have you been called to follow Jesus? Number one, if the answer is yes, have you been called to be like Jesus? If the answer is yes, then we know that running out of a tough situation isn't the best answer always, right?
That's good.
Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be tough, but I mean, Gomer was asked to marry a prostitute by the Lord. He told him. So there are those all throughout Scripture. We find evidence that they were put into a place where, I mean, Moses was born in the middle of a genocide against people like him, Jewish young men. So that's the first thing that I have to reconcile. Have I counted the cost? And have I recognized all of what the gospel actually demands of me? Sure, peace. In many instances, prosperity. In many instances, great community, wonderful joy and people to show love. But in many ways, Jesus said, if they keep my word, they'll keep your word. But if they persecuted me, they'll persecute you also. So there's that piece. Now, what do you do after that? I think if you recognize your call, you can go into place and then you're honest before God, as we talked before. David said in Psalm 51, my sin is ever before me. I think that, to me, that means that he was always able to determine and explain to God the state of his soul. Like, I'm broken, I'm hurt. I really look at the Psalms as a journal of a man trying to please the Lord and live a holy lifestyle. So if we can begin to live in that lifestyle where we're truthful before God and we're honest before God, then we know we're calling. We know that we're called to follow him. We know we're called to hard situations. We know that we're honest before God. Then we can move into a place to be able to seek and pray for the Lord to send allies. Send people who maybe not, they have a curiosity, right? I'm a minority in this church or this job or this school or this classroom or this doctor's office. God, show me those who are curious and give me the grace to show them the grace so that we can begin a relationship to understand one another's pain. That's the first step. And it's about living in the tension. So the issue with that is that I think we run from tension all too fast, because tension and discomfort are kind of anti-American, but it's all the way to the gospel and kingdom.
Amen. Our people will be hearing a little bit more about that this coming Sunday.
Awesome, man. Praise God. Grateful to be in the spirit.
Yes. Tell us about the role that you believe the church can play in society right now. Yeah. Does it, I'll ask you this, if I can piggyback on it, does it have the capacity to be a shaker and mover in our communities still today?
I believe that wholeheartedly. Not only does the church have the capacity to be a mover and shaker in our communities today, I believe it is the only answer for injustices and all sorts of sin that have played themselves out in society today. We hold the mandate. And I think when Jesus said, give to Caesar what is due to Caesar, he meant it. Many things that we often look to be the end all be all of change, like voting, is really to God, in my estimation and my interpretation. I don't say that this is 100% biblical, but it is my estimation that voting is very similar to paying your taxes. It is something that you must do. It is something that you have a right to do. And it's something that you should really look at as a mandate. But it cannot be the thing that you truly believe is going to move change forward. So then what else is there? Well, as we talked about before, the ability to show empathy, to come down or to walk across the aisle or to go to my neighbor and to sit in and listen. Be slow to speak, quick to listen, right? We got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Let's do twice as much listening as we do speaking, right? The scriptures that I look to for that, Romans 12:15, James 4:9 and 10, right? Then when we are in a space of empathy, that's kind of like the state of grief. When you start to feel the pain of something that you yourself are not enduring, that is empathy. And that is a process of grief. And you have to walk through that grief process really slowly. And you have to give yourself grace and time. And you need to be around people who are suffering, who are not going to pressure you to step out and do things off of impulse, right? So the next step to me, other than empathy, would be solidarity, right? And I would say John 17, in my estimation, talks about that. The idea that, I can stand with you. Sure. I can agree with you. We can recognize together this is a problem. This is a reality. Instead of, and this will go back to what you said earlier, we look for a small nugget of inconsistency and a small infraction within the pain, and we say, no, that's the problem. Looting, killing, so on and so forth. And so I believe that's just a way that people choose to escape out of the role that they play in fighting against injustice. Let me complain about the smaller portion of the narrative and let me not see the whole, because now I can justify standing still and doing nothing. Then the other piece to me is allyship. In World War II was won through allies. At some point, I am emotionally weak. I am not able to carry the load that I'm carrying. Jesus Christ, Simon of Cyrene, an African, by the way, who later gave his life to Christ and his whole family gave to Christ. It was an African that the Roman soldiers called out the crowd to help Jesus carry his cross to Calvary. We need allies. We need people that are willing to mourn with us, right? And live out Micah 6:8, to do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God and walk humbly with us, those who are suffering. And this, I think what I'm saying applies to any suffering, from abortion to sex trafficking, right? Which are the 2 things that you typically hear in evangelical.
Sure.
But there's so much more, right? From the womb to the tomb.
It's good. It's good.
So, and then the last piece to me will be, as we do these things, we go from being a non-racist to being an anti-racist. I'm against racism, and I will add that to the many things as a believer that I'm called to do to fight against sin and how it is encroaching on society and destroying people within the church and outside of the church.
Yeah, the reality is that we don't necessarily see in the Bible these outright statements that talk about oppression of those of a different skin color.
Right.
But it directly confronts oppression of those that we somehow deem beneath us.
Right.
And if you realize that, that is a thread that just goes through everything.
Wow.
Goes through everything.
Right.
Jesus Jesus, answers that question of
Yeah.
which is the most important commandment by saying, hear, O Israel. He does the Shema right there.
Yep.
And the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your
Mm.
God with all your heart, with all your
Mm.
soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And he says, and the second is like it,
Mm.
love your neighbor as yourself.
All of the law and the prophets hang on these very two. And it's the two we still struggle today to get right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
What's your hope right now in
Mm.
all of this? What is your hope?
Honestly, my hope has been answered in many ways. That an onslaught of believers would become grieved and begin to wail of all backgrounds. And I'm seeing that. I'm seeing across the globe, while the pressure cooker is under us and we're all under fire from COVID-19 to people losing their jobs, unemployment at higher than it's ever been. Hundreds of thousands of people have died in this pandemic. An onslaught of believers have joined in the cause of saying, you know what? I will value others more than I value myself. Proverbs 31, 8 and 9. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. And as we begin to embrace that theology and do what Jesus did so well, feel the pain of others and walk them through grieving and solution and activism, I'm seeing that happen. My hope beyond that is that people will begin to galvanize and talk more about becoming anti-racist and becoming allies of suffering people. And I don't want to make the mistake of saying that every single person on earth who follows Jesus will have the same affinity towards the same kinds of social justice issues. I do believe that God has called and apportioned certain people in the body. Ephesians 4 talks about that, to work the body together, to build up, to come to a sense of maturity. However, I don't think we have no role to play. You got to be doing something. And there should be no off limits social justice issues. None of them should be off limits. But it's a matter of, God, where are you calling me? So prayer, fast, man. Something that I've been doing more recently because of the lifestyle that I live is saying, you know what, Lord, I'm going to dedicate sundown to noon and begin to fast daily and say, Lord, keep my spirit still. Keep my heart still. I took a couple weeks break, but I thought to myself, maybe the way I used to fast in the past, 3 days without eating anything, sometimes I didn't even drink water. Maybe for me right now with 3 kids and working a ton of hours and leading teams at church is not helpful for me, but to make a dedicated time that, Lord, these several hours here are dedicated to me hearing you.
Sure.
And just being before you. So I think that's the blanket and a bed of everything. And that people would, as my pastor said more recently, listen, lament, listen, learn, and lament. Or lament, actually, listen and learn. And the learning piece is huge because I do have some resources that I can send to you that you can attach to this video or whatever. That I have a whole document that talks about working through anti-racism. I have another document specifically geared toward white people in its title, but I think in its function, this article, anyone can do the things that
Sure.
this article talks about. 75 things to fight against injustice. This article, and then several books that I've been reading. The one that comes to mind for me for believers, if they're just scratching the surface, is by a pastor named Miles McPherson. He's of mixed descent. He's from the New York City area, and he has a church out in California or out west, I believe. Former NFL player. His book is called The Third Option, which is really reconciliation. So I think just beginning the journey for some is huge, and then finding the allies to begin to mobilize and do things that fight against injustice in a bipartisan way, because we shall not make the things that moves the kingdom forward politically portioned off. Like these are not political things; these are human things.
Amen. Amen. Jelani, thank you for taking the time today. I know out of your busy schedule,
Thank you for
Yeah,
asking me,
and
man.
I know that God is going to use this conversation, as I
Mm,
know He's using you, and is continuing to bless you and Nyasia and the
amen.
family. And I pray that the Lord would continue to bless you and keep you and make His face to shine upon you and
Mm,
give you His peace in everything.
amen.
Love you, brother.
Amen. Love you.
God bless
Love
you.
you so much. God bless.
Thank you.